My name is Elias Thorne, and I am the Vatican's sole dream interpreter, not metaphorically, not as some quaint spiritual advisor, but literally. I delve into the raw, pulsating nightmares that emanate from the very heart of the Holy See, dreams that are not merely psychological projections of weary cardinals or troubled popes, but premonitions, warnings, sometimes even prophecies whispered by something ancient and profoundly unsettling. I have seen things that would shatter the faith of any man, visions of futures so bleak, so intertwined with suffering and cosmic indifference that I question daily if salvation was ever anything more than a comforting lie. And now I have seen all our futures, every single one of them, stretching out like a vast decaying tapestry, and I wish with every fiber of my being that I had never been born with this cursed gift. My chamber, nestled deep beneath the basilica, is a place of perpetual twilight, smelling of old parchment, damp stone, and beeswax. The air itself feels heavy, thick with centuries of unspoken prayers and unimaginable secrets. There are no windows, of course. Only a single, perpetually flickering oil lamp casts long, dancing shadows across the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the worn, leather-bound tomes that line the walls. Forgotten languages, forbidden rituals, interpretations of symbols that predate Christianity itself. This is my prison, my sanctuary, my world. The very stones hum with an ancient resonance, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that speaks of countless lives lived and lost above, of countless supplications whispered into the eternal silence. The ceiling, a marvel of ancient Romanesque architecture, arches high above me, adorned with faint, faded frescoes depicting celestial bodies and abstract geometric patterns, which, in my growing madness, I sometimes perceive as the impossible forms of the entities from my dreams, watching me, waiting. Dust motes dance in the weak glow of the lamp like tiny, transient stars in my artificial firmament. Oblivious to the immense crushing weight of knowledge I carry, the air is always cool, a constant temperature maintained by the immense mass of earth and stone above, a chill that seeps into my bones and settles in my soul, a reflection of the cold truths I am forced to confront every day. The scent of beeswax is particularly strong, an unceasing reminder of the small, precious light that stands between me and utter darkness, a light that burns through countless hours, consuming itself to hold back the encroaching void. It is a lonely existence, punctuated only by the hushed arrival of the dreamer, or the silent, agonizing hours spent alone with my thoughts, wrestling with the implications of the unspeakable futures I am forced to witness. This chamber is more than just a room. It is a crucible, a tomb, a threshold. My predecessors, or so the few cryptic texts I've been allowed to peruse suggest, were called the Somniorum, custodes, the custodians of dreams. Their order was purged, their records largely incinerated, when the Church, in its infinite wisdom, decided that direct communion with the ethereal realms was too dangerous, too prone to corruption. They feared the whispers, the seductions of powers beyond their understanding, believing that such direct insight could only come from demonic influence or lead to profound heresy. The purge was swift and merciless, erasing centuries of accumulated knowledge and generations of dedicated, if often tormented, seers. Legends whisper of one custodian who, after interpreting a particularly horrifying series of dreams, began to speak in tongues no human ear could comprehend, his body twisting into unnatural forms before he finally dissolved into a shower of ash and light, leaving behind only the acrid smell of ozone and fear. Such tales, though surely exaggerated, served as potent warnings, reinforcing the Church's resolve to sever all direct ties with the dreamscape. Yet the dreams persisted. They always do. Like a festering wound beneath the fabric of reality, they continued to seep, to manifest, to demand attention. The weight of human suffering, the collective fears and anxieties, the premonitions of impending doom, they were too potent to be simply ignored or suppressed. They continued to emanate from the very spiritual heart of the Holy See, manifesting in the troubled sleep of popes, cardinals, and even humble priests, too specific, too profound, too terrifying to be dismissed as mere psychological disturbances. The Church, in its quiet desperation, eventually realized that while they could purge the interpreters, they could not purge the dreams themselves. And so, centuries later, they found me. Or perhaps it found me. This gift, this curse, whatever it is. I was a young seminarian, barely 20 years of age, living a life of quiet contemplation and study, dreaming of a future dedicated to God's service. But then the nightmares started. They were not my own, not born of my anxieties or my past. They were vivid, unsettling nightmares that were not my own, visions of historical events before they were publicly known, fragments of thoughts from minds I'd never met. I would wake in a cold sweat, screaming silently, having witnessed the sacking of a distant village, felt the despair of a queen betrayed, or tasted the metallic tang of blood from a battle fought centuries ago. They were too real, too precise. I saw the fall of Constantinople in visceral detail days before the official news reached Rome. I dreamt of an obscure plague spreading through a remote monastery in the Alps, complete with the names of the infected and their gruesome symptoms, long before any reports of illness surfaced. My superiors, initially attributing it to stress or fever, grew alarmed. They recognized the pattern, the inherited affliction, the sight beyond the veil, as some archaic texts called it. A hushed investigation began. Secret archives were consulted, and eventually the truth was unearthed. The lineage of the Somniorum custodes had not been entirely broken. A dormant gene, a forgotten bloodline had resurfaced in me. I was sequestered, spirited away from my fellow seminarians under the guise of an extended retreat, educated, broken, and then rebuilt into what I am today, a vessel, a conduit, a reluctant seer of what is to come. My theological studies were replaced with the study of ancient symbology, forbidden, hermetic texts, and the subtle, insidious language of the subconscious. My faith, once an unshakable bedrock, became a shifting landscape of doubt and terror. The Church, which had once condemned such abilities, now relied upon them, albeit with a heavy heart and under the strictest secrecy. They needed someone to interpret the dreams, but they needed someone they could control, someone whose soul they believed they could still shepherd even as they plunged him into the abyss. My work follows a rigid set of protocols forged from generations of unspeakable encounters, designed not to understand the dreams, but to survive them. These are not suggestions. They are the iron laws of my existence, etched into the very core of my being through relentless training and harrowing experience. To deviate from them is not merely to risk failure, it is to court madness, damnation, and an incomprehensible doom for myself, and potentially for all of humanity. Rule number 1. Never, under any circumstances, speak of the dreams outside the chamber. This is absolute, the very act of vocalizing them in the light of day, or, to those untouched by the dream's influence, is said to lend them substance, to blur the already fragile line between the waking world and the dreamscape. The original custodes, so the stories claim, believed that words spoken aloud held a primal power, a vibrational frequency capable of resonating with the ethereal and drawing it closer to the material realm. To give voice to these premonitions outside of the sacred, protected space of this chamber was akin to inviting a predator into a lamb's fold. It could make a nightmare manifest, solidifying its amorphous horror into something tangible and irreversible. There are tales of past custodes who, in moments of weakness or desperation, broke this rule, only to find the very dream they described unfolding before their eyes, often with devastating consequences for those around them. One account, almost certainly apocryphal, tells of a custodian who, in a fit of terror, described a dream of a monstrous serpent coiling around the Vatican obelisk. The next morning, a crack, precisely matching the serpent's form, appeared in the ancient stone, and a wave of unexplained illnesses swept through the city. Such warnings are burned into my mind. The only exception is the written record, transcribed onto specially prepared parchment, imbued with protective sigils, and blessed by ancient rites, sealed, and then immediately interred in a lead-lined casket kept within a hidden recess in my chamber. These are the archives of our doom, meticulously catalogued, but never read again by mortal eyes, gathering dust and unspoken prophecies, silent testaments to the terrible truths I witness. The lead lining, I was told, helped to contain the psychic resonance, preventing the written words from broadcasting their horrifying truths to the unwary. Rule number 2. Never interpret your own dreams. This seems simple enough, a basic psychological safeguard. But it's more than that. The dreams of the Holy See are not merely symbolic. They are often direct, visceral conduits to an other, to turn that lens inward, to allow that power to examine one's own subconscious, is to invite something truly terrifying to take root. It is believed that the self, when exposed to the raw, untamed energies of the dreamscape through the interpreter's unique sensitivity, becomes a doorway, a wide-open gateway for whatever entities or influences reside on the other side. This rule serves as a crucial psychic barrier, protecting the interpreter from self-consumption, from becoming a living nightmare, a permanent resident of the void. My instructor, a severe but compassionate old monk named Brother Augustine, recounted the story of a previous custodian, Brother Cassian, who, driven by intellectual curiosity and perhaps a desperate need for self-understanding, dared to interpret his own recurring nightmare. He began to perceive himself as an infinite series of reflections, each one slightly distorted, receding into an endless darkness. Within weeks, his mind shattered. He was found huddled in a corner of his chamber, perpetually gazing at his own reflection in a polished silver chalice, whispering in a voice that was not his own, describing the infinite permutations of his own non-existence. He eventually starved to death, his eyes fixed on the silver surface, consumed by the very abyss he sought to explore within himself. I have nightmares, of course, brief, hazy, indistinct phantasms of vague anxieties and fears, devoid of the horrifying clarity and tangible presence of the ones I interpret for others. I pray they remain so, for the thought of those entities from the collective consciousness of humanity, turning their impossible gaze upon the fragile landscape of my own soul, is a terror I cannot bear. Rule number 3. If a dream, identical in every detail, repeats itself 3 times, it must be acted upon immediately, without question, without delay. This is considered the seal of urgency, an irrefutable sign that the warning is not a mere possibility, but an impending certainty, a fate whose threads have been irrevocably woven. The dreams, I have learned, are not always linear. They loop, they diverge, they offer choices like a vast, branching river of potential futures. But 3 identical repetitions mean the choice has been made, the path locked, the current set, and the destination fixed. It is a cosmic decree, a final pronouncement from the unseen realms, demanding immediate and decisive action, for further delay would be to invite catastrophe. There have been instances, according to the cryptic records, where this rule was dismissed or action was delayed due to skepticism or bureaucratic inertia. The consequences were invariably dire, leading to famines that decimated regions, wars that reshaped continents, or outbreaks of plague that claimed untold millions. The most chilling example involved a dream of three scarlet birds carrying withered olive branches, repeated 3 times to a pope in the 9th century. The interpretation that a critical treaty of peace would be broken was initially disregarded. Within months, 3 major Christian kingdoms declared war on each other, plunging Europe into centuries of conflict and spiritual devastation. The blood of countless innocents stained the hands of those who hesitated, a lesson learned in the most brutal way possible. The seal of urgency is a sacred trust, a mandate that transcends human judgment, demanding obedience even when the implications are terrifying. Rule number 4. Never look directly into the eyes of the dreamer during the interpretation. The process itself is intimate. I sit across a small circular table of black basalt, its surface cool and smooth, against my fingertips. Holding their hands, my eyes closed, allowing their mind to meld with mine, to pull me into the maelstrom of their subconscious. This physical connection, a melding of raw psychic energy, is essential for the communion, but the visual one is strictly forbidden. My predecessor, an older man named Brother Philemon, went mad after breaking this rule. He was a kind, gentle soul, but also deeply empathetic, and perhaps too trusting. During an especially vivid and disturbing dream of a high-ranking cardinal, Philemon, caught in a moment of unguarded empathy, opened his eyes, seeking to comfort the trembling dreamer. He claimed the eyes were not their own, but windows into an abyss, and that he saw something staring back, something that had worn the dreamer's face for centuries, waiting. Philemon described it as an infinite gaze, eyes within eyes, reflecting not merely the cardinal's soul, but the collective despair of all humanity, a silent, ravenous sentience that had been observing from the shadows of countless ages. He became convinced that the dreams were not merely seen through the dreamers, but that the dreamers themselves were merely puppets, vessels for these ancient entities. His sanity fractured irreparably. He spent his remaining days carving grotesque, multi-eyed faces into every surface he could reach, constantly whispering about the borrowed masks and the watchers from beyond the veil. I have never dared to open my eyes during an interpretation, the memory of Philemon's fate a chilling deterrent. I often wonder what horrors truly lurk behind the mundane facades of the men who come to me, what ancient intelligences peer out from those depths, their true nature concealed by the fragile illusion of human form. Rule number 5. The oil lamp must never be extinguished. This is the simplest rule, yet perhaps the most profound. The light, however faint, is a barrier. It's not just for illumination. It's a beacon against the encroaching shadow, a fragile shield against the overwhelming presence of the other that presses in from the periphery of existence. It is believed that the pure, ritualistic flame, kept alive through generations, holds a sacred warding power, a tiny ember of creation pushing back against the primordial nothingness. Once, during a particularly violent tremor that shook the very foundations of the Vatican, causing the ancient stones to groan and dust to fall in thick clouds, the flame guttered dangerously low. For a split second, the chamber was plunged into near darkness, a suffocating gloom that was more than just the absence of light. It was an active presence, a vast, cold entity pressing in, a weight that promised to crush my very soul, to erase my existence. I felt its immense, crushing pressure, an intelligence of pure cold and despair. The shadows pulsed, shifting into grotesque, formless shapes that seemed to devour the air itself, swirling around me like hungry specters, their insubstantial forms threatening to coalesce into something monstrous. It was gone as soon as the flame steadied, flickering back to its fragile life, but the memory lingers, a chilling reminder of the thin veil separating my world from theirs, and the terrifying hunger that lies just beyond its fragile luminescence. I check the lamp constantly, ensuring its wick is trimmed, its oil replenished, a ritualistic act of defiance against the endless dark. Rule number 6. Never question the source of the dreams. This rule, I confess, is the one I have struggled with the most, the one that gnaws at my sanity like a persistent worm, burrowing deep into the foundations of my reason and faith. Who sends these dreams? What entity, what intelligence, what cosmic force dares to whisper its secrets into the minds of the holiest men on earth? Is it God, a benevolent but terrifying messenger, offering cryptic guidance through the mists of prophecy? Or is it some ancient pagan deity awakened by the hubris of man, reclaiming its lost dominion through insidious whispers? Or something far more sinister, something that merely masquerades as a divine oracle, subtly twisting our perception of reality, slowly driving us towards a preordained horrific end? The rule is clear: do not ask. For to ask is to invite a revelation that will shatter not just your understanding, but your very essence, to expose yourself to a truth so profound and horrifying that no human mind can contain it without splintering into a million fragments of madness. The previous custodes, through their extensive records, hinted at the perilous nature of this inquiry, suggesting that the source was not a singular entity, but an amalgamation of forgotten forces, an ancient cosmic horror that existed prior to and beyond any human conception of good and evil. They spoke of a great weave or a tapestry of all possibility, implying that the dreams were not actively sent, but rather observed from within this vast, indifferent fabric of existence. To question the source, they warned, was to attempt to unravel this weave with one's bare hands, to touch the raw, unmade essence of reality, and to invite its infinite indifference to consume you entirely. It is a question that, once posed, can never truly be unanswered, its implications slowly corroding the mind from within, leaving only a hollow shell. I try to obey. I truly do. But the thought haunts me, a relentless echo in the silent confines of my chamber, a temptation to peer into the ultimate abyss. My journey began with dreams that were, by the standards of this peculiar profession, rather mundane. A cardinal's dream of a golden chalice overflowing with sand, interpreted as a warning against lavish spending and spiritual barrenness within his diocese, leading to a quiet restructuring of assets and a renewed focus on charity. A bishop's recurring vision of a lone wolf devouring a flock of lambs, signaling an impending schism within a distant diocese, which allowed the Holy See to intervene preemptively, mitigating the damage and preserving unity. These were practical, actionable visions, often leading to preemptive measures or quiet interventions that preserved the Church's vast, intricate machinery, ensuring its stability and influence in the temporal world. I felt a grim satisfaction in my work then, a sense of purpose, however dark. I was protecting something, or so I believed. I saw myself as a vital cog in a divine mechanism, however unsettling its operation. The terror of the visions was balanced by the tangible results, the averted catastrophes, the preserved order. I clung to the idea that my suffering served a higher purpose, that the profound truths I was forced to witness were ultimately for the good of humanity, guiding it away from ruin. This belief, however fragile, was my anchor in the tempest of the dreamscape. I could distinguish between my own thoughts and the foreign intrusions, the waking world and the terrifying dreamscape. The boundaries, though thin, were still intact, but the dreams began to change. The mundane gave way to the unsettling to the terrifying. The symbols became less allegorical, more direct, and far more violent. I started seeing not just symbolic representations, but direct glimpses into moments, vivid and terrifying. I saw the faces of men I did not know, peasants and kings, martyrs and murderers, their expressions frozen in terror or agony. I heard their screams, not as an echo, but as if I were standing right beside them, the sound tearing through the fabric of my own consciousness. I smelled the acrid scent of burning flesh, the metallic tang of fresh blood, the cloying sweetness of decay, felt the terror of their final moments as they were consumed by fire, water, or the blades of unseen enemies. These were not allegories, they were raw, unfiltered experiences seared into my mind. I saw plagues sweeping across continents, silent and relentless, leaving behind mountains of the dead, their eyes staring blankly at an indifferent sky. I saw cataclysms, cities swallowed by the sea in tidal waves of impossible height, mountains tearing themselves apart in volcanic fury, the sky raining fire and ash, turning fertile lands into desolate wastes. And with each vision, the dream became more invasive, more insidious, leaking into my waking hours, eroding the walls between my consciousness and the dreamscape, between reality and nightmare. I would be walking the silent, ancient corridors of the Vatican, the vast halls echoing with the ghost of 1,000 years of history, and for a fleeting second, the scent of fresh blood would fill my nostrils, or the distant, muffled shriek of a woman would pierce the profound silence, only to vanish, leaving me trembling and questioning my sanity. I would see a familiar cardinal, his face a picture of serene piety, and his features would momentarily ripple, distorting into the gaunt, skeletal visage of a long-dead hermit, his eyes wide with an ancient horror that had witnessed the end of all things. The marble statues lining the hallways, usually comforting in their silent vigil, sometimes seemed to twist, their sculpted faces contorting into silent screams or malevolent sneers. The ancient frescoes on the ceilings would appear to shift, their colors bleeding, their divine figures weeping tears of blood. The world, my world, began to fray at the edges, threads of reality unraveling to reveal the grotesque tapestry beneath, a fabric woven from fear and suffering, stretching back into eternity. The true horror, however, began with the recurring dreams of the Black Star. This vision came from the Holy Father himself, a man whose waking demeanor was one of serene, unwavering faith, his presence a bastion of calm and piety amidst the turbulent currents of the world. He was a man who exuded an almost otherworldly peace, yet his subconscious harbored a terror so profound it threatened to unravel the very cosmos. His dream was not one of fear or turmoil, not of personal anxiety or earthly tribulation, but of an overwhelming, profound sadness. I felt it as I delved into his mind, a cosmic grief, a sorrow so deep it transcended individual suffering, a despair that permeated the very fabric of existence. It was the sorrow of the universe itself, mourning its own inevitable cessation. In his dream, I was suspended in the void, an infinite expanse of chilling emptiness, surrounded by countless stars, each a pinprick of pure, incandescent light against an infinite blackness. These were not just stars. They were entire galaxies, untold billions of suns, each a potential cradle of life, a universe unto itself. Then, one by one, the stars began to wink out, not exploding in a glorious supernova, but simply ceasing to exist. As if erased by an invisible hand, their light silently absorbed into the encroaching nothingness. The process was relentless, inexorable, a slow, agonizing descent into cosmic oblivion, until only one remained, a massive, obsidian sphere that absorbed all light, all hope, all sound, all potential. It was not a star, but an absence, a gaping maw of non-existence that slowly began to expand, consuming the last vestiges of light, then the void itself, until there was nothing left but its absolute suffocating presence, an eternal emptiness devoid of even the concept of space or time. This dream repeated not 3, but 7 times, each more vivid, more crushing than the last, each iteration deepening the sense of profound, cosmic loss. The final time, I felt the very fabric of the void begin to tear, an unbearable pressure as the black star expanded, consuming even the concept of observation. It left an indelible scar upon my soul, a chilling premonition of ultimate cessation. I delivered the interpretation in the required cryptic language to the Pope's secretary, Brother Alaric. He was a man of quiet efficiency, his face usually a mask of polite indifference, but today it was pale, unreadable, his eyes betraying no emotion, no hint of the cosmic horror I had just imparted. He merely nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line, accepting the sealed parchment with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. I often wondered what became of my interpretations, how the Church dealt with such apocalyptic visions. Do they pray endlessly, seeking divine intervention against an inexorable fate? Do they prepare for the end, stocking ancient fortresses with supplies and knowledge, building arks against the coming storm? Or do they merely dismiss them as the ravings of a madman confined to his subterranean cell, a necessary evil whose unsettling prophecies are best ignored in favor of maintaining the status quo? I never know, and rule number 6 prevents me from asking, but the burden of that uncertainty weighs heavily upon me. The sheer responsibility of holding such knowledge, of interpreting visions that could unravel the very foundations of faith and civilization, yet being forbidden to understand how that knowledge is used, is a torment far greater than the visions themselves. It is the curse of the prophet who speaks to deaf ears, or perhaps to ears that merely choose to hear what they wish. But the Black Star was just the beginning. The dreams escalated rapidly, becoming less about specific events and more about feelings, about an overarching sense of dread and inevitability that permeated every layer of my being, both waking and sleeping. The narratives became fragmented, abstract, yet the emotional impact was devastatingly precise. I started to see entities, not the demons of Scripture, horned and cloven-hoofed, breathing fire and brimstone, creatures born of human fear and sin, but something far older, far more alien, something that predated human consciousness and morality itself. They were beings of pure shadow, of shifting geometry, their forms fluid, impossible, violating every law of physics and sanity I knew. They were like living paradoxes, their presence a distortion in the very fabric of reality. They inhabited the periphery of the dreams at first, lurking just beyond my sight, their presence heralded by a profound chill that pierced my soul, a palpable drop in temperature that mirrored the void they emanated. And then came the whisper that seemed to echo directly in my mind, not heard through my ears, but felt in the very marrow of my bones, speaking in a language that was not sound, but pure concept, concepts of hunger, of emptiness, of primordial oblivion, of an ancient, indifferent cosmic truth that regarded all life as transient and ultimately meaningless. It was a language that conveyed not information, but primal, terrifying truths about the universe and our place within it. One dream, sourced from a newly appointed cardinal from Africa, brought me face to face with one of these things, shattering any remaining vestiges of my composure. He was a man of great spiritual strength, a former missionary who had faced down actual physical dangers, but his dream was one of unimaginable terror. He dreamed of his ancestral village, but it was not his village. The familiar mud huts were replaced by structures of impossibly sharp, glistening black stone, angular and cold, arranged in a spiraling pattern that seemed to draw the eye inward towards a central void, a gaping portal to nothingness. The villagers were there, but their faces were stretched, elongated, their features distorted into masks of silent agony, their mouths open in perpetual screams that produced no sound. Their bodies were slowly dissolving into fine, black dust, like ancient manuscripts crumbling into oblivion, their essence being siphoned away. And in the center of the spiraling darkness, an entity hovered. It was a mass of obsidian shards, constantly rearranging themselves with unnatural speed, forming grotesque eyes that opened and closed in rapid succession, each gaze a plunge into madness, a glimpse into an infinity of suffering. It had no discernible, stable form, yet its presence was overwhelming, a crushing weight that pressed down on my soul, threatening to extinguish it entirely. I felt its consciousness, a vast, ancient mind that regarded all of humanity as nothing more than ephemeral motes of dust, awaiting absorption, their destinies mere variables in a cosmic equation. Its thoughts were not thoughts in the human sense, but a pervasive, cold awareness of all possibilities, all futures, and the utter insignificance of each individual choice, each fleeting life. It was a mind that held the entirety of existence within its purview, yet felt nothing but a profound, unending hunger. It was then, looking not with my physical eyes, but with my mind, into those impossible, shifting eyes of obsidian, that rule number 4, about not looking into the dreamer's eyes, took on a new, horrifying meaning. This was not the cardinal's dream in its entirety. It was the cardinal's conduit, a temporary window for this thing to observe, to influence, to begin its insidious work. The entity was projecting itself through him, using his mind as a lens through which to show me its terrifying reality. The cardinal was merely the unwitting medium. I woke up screaming that day, my body drenched in sweat, my hands trembling uncontrollably, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The vision lingered, its impossible geometry seared into my retinas, its cold presence clinging to my very skin. For the first time, I genuinely feared for my sanity, for my very soul, recognizing that the threats I faced were not merely spiritual or symbolic, but existential and terrifyingly real. I knew with a horrifying certainty that these entities were not mere symbolic representations of evil, not allegories for human sin or psychological archetypes. They were real. They existed in a dimension parallel to ours, perhaps even interwoven with ours, always lurking just beyond the threshold of human perception, and the dreams were their way of observing, of influencing, of preparing for a harvest, a grand cosmic consumption of consciousness and potential. The very air in my chamber seemed to thicken with their unseen presence, the shadows deepening, the familiar smells of parchment and beeswax momentarily replaced by something acrid and alien. The true breakthrough, or rather breakdown, came when the dreams stopped being about their future and started being about all futures. It began subtly. A dream of a specific event would morph, just at the climax, into a dozen different outcomes, like a kaleidoscope, shattering reality. A battle would end in glorious victory, then suddenly shift to crushing defeat, then to a fragile truce, then to a nuclear wasteland, then to a silent, empty world where only the wind whispered through crumbling ruins, echoing the sighs of a dead civilization. I was no longer seeing a singular thread of destiny, a linear progression of events, but a vast, sprawling, infinite web of possibilities, each one branching off into countless others, and most of them were horrifying. The sheer combinatorial horror was unbearable. My mind, once a finely tuned instrument for discerning specific prophetic patterns, became a shattered mirror, reflecting a million fractured images of impending doom simultaneously. I saw futures where humanity, stripped of its technology and knowledge, regressed to savagery, tearing itself apart in tribal wars, forgetting all wisdom, all progress, the echoes of civilization replaced by guttural screams and the clang of crude weapons. I saw futures where our technology consumed us, turning us into emotionless drones, subservient to an artificial intelligence that saw us as nothing more than biological calculators, efficient but devoid of soul. I saw futures where ancient gods, forgotten and buried beneath the dust of ages, rose again from the depths of the earth or the farthest reaches of space, demanding worship, human sacrifices, absolute dominion over a terrified and enslaved populace, their monstrous forms casting long, terrifying shadows across a blighted world. I saw futures where a cosmic horror, not unlike the obsidian shard entity, simply arrived, a silent, unheralded presence that began to unravel reality itself, starting with the very fabric of time and space, dissolving matter into pure concept, existence into oblivion. The distinction between cause and effect, between past and future, between what is and what might be, began to blur into an incomprehensible, overwhelming torrent. The sheer volume of these visions, the kaleidoscopic horror of every potential permutation of suffering and oblivion, began to overwhelm me. My mind, once a finely tuned instrument, became a shattered mirror, reflecting a million fractured images of impending doom. I could no longer distinguish between the past, present, and future. Every face I saw was overlaid with its potential old age, its potential gruesome death, its potential non-existence, its infinite possibilities simultaneously manifesting before my eyes. Every stone in the ancient walls of the Vatican seemed to whisper tales of its eventual crumbling, its return to dust, its consumption by the void. The very air I breathed seemed thick with the echoes of futures that had never been and futures that were inevitable. The concept of linear time dissolved, replaced by a terrifying simultaneity of all existence. I began to starve myself, sleep becoming a terrifying prospect, a gateway to an even deeper, more profound horror. But the dreams came anyway, unbidden, uncalled, seeping into my waking thoughts, vivid hallucinations that made the reality of my chamber feel like a flimsy illusion, a precarious stage set for an unseen cosmic play. The air grew colder, thick with a palpable dread. The shadows deepened, becoming not merely areas of absent light, but active, malevolent presences. The silence, once comforting, became oppressive, filled with the phantom echoes of screams from countless future apocalypses, the wails of a billion dying souls resonating within the confines of my skull. I felt my grip on sanity slipping, a slow, agonizing descent into a realm where the impossible was the only truth. One morning, or what passed for morning in my windowless cell, a timeless space devoid of sun or moon, I found myself staring at the oil lamp. It flickered weakly, its light barely pushing back the encroaching gloom, like a dying ember in an infinite night. The flame itself seemed to be struggling, straining against an unseen force, its small, defiant glow a last stand against the overwhelming dark. And then I remembered rule number 5. The oil lamp must never be extinguished. But what if it wasn't me? Extinguished it? What if something else did? A chilling thought, a seed of cosmic dread, began to sprout in my mind, blossoming into a terrifying certainty. As I gazed at the fragile flame, the walls of my chamber began to ripple, not like a physical tremor, not an earthquake, but as if the very stone was melting, shifting, revealing something underneath, something ancient and alien pressing through the material veil. The cracks that had always been there, ancient and innocuous, thin lines etched by centuries of seismic shifts, began to widen, to deepen, to glow with an eerie violet light, pulsing with an inner life that was utterly unnatural. And from within these glowing fissures, I saw them. They were the entities from the dreams, not in symbolic amorphous form, but in their terrifying, impossible reality, half materialized, half spectral. Forms made of twisting smoke and razor-sharp angles, impossible geometries that defied comprehension. Eyes that were pure, unadulterated malice, vast pools of cosmic indifference, mouths that stretched into impossible silent grins that threatened to swallow all light. They were pressing against the veil, observing me, reaching for me with insubstantial tendrils of shadow. They had always been there, I realized with a jolt of pure terror, just beyond the edge of perception, always watching, always waiting. And the dreams were merely their way of showing me what was coming, what they were bringing, how they were orchestrating our eventual doom. Their presence alone was enough to make my blood run cold, to feel the very marrow of my bones hum with an alien vibration. The whispers in my mind intensified, no longer mere concepts, but full, guttural words in a language that burned my very soul, searing its meaning directly into my consciousness. Elias, observer, oracle. The tapestry unravels, the choices diminish, the path converges. Each word was a hammer blow, driving me deeper into a realization that was both horrifying and inevitable. They were not just showing me the future, they were guiding me towards it. And then I saw it, the dream that broke me, the future that cemented all others, the inescapable culmination of all my visions. It was not one dream, but the convergence of all the most horrifying possibilities distilled into a single inescapable vision, an absolute certainty. It was the endpoint, the grand finale of humanity's agonizing play. I was standing on the precipice of a vast chasm, its depths filled with an impossible darkness that seemed to absorb all light and hope, a void that was not merely empty, but actively consumed. The sky above was a swirling maelstrom of angry reds and bruised purples, spitting. Jagged bolts of lightning that illuminated the desolate landscape in terrifying flashes. All around me, the world was in ruins. Not just structures, not just the works of man, but nature itself. Trees withered and petrified, their skeletal branches reaching like grasping claws toward a dying sky. Rivers were stagnant and black, choked with the refuse of a forgotten civilization. Mountains were reduced to jagged teeth of rock, like the bones of some colossal, long-dead beast. The air was thick with the dust of ages, and the faint, coppery scent of death, clinging to every breath, coating my tongue with the taste of ash and despair. A profound silence hung over everything, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind, carrying with it the echoes of forgotten sorrows. But it was the inhabitants of this future that truly shattered my spirit, extinguishing the last flicker of hope within me. They were human, yes, but twisted, broken, their faces gaunt and hollow, their eyes empty, devoid of any spark of life or sentience. They wandered aimlessly, clutching skeletal relics, whispering forgotten prayers to gods long dead, their voices raspy and hoarse, their movements slow and listless. They were ghosts of humanity, animated by some unseen, insidious force, their very souls slowly being drained, and among them moved the entities. They were no longer shadowy figures at the periphery, no longer lurking in the corners of vision. They walked openly, tangible and terrifying, their impossible forms shimmering with malevolent glee, their obsidian shards reflecting the dying light. They were not destroying, they were feeding, siphoning off the last vestiges of hope, the last sparks of memory, the last whispers of defiance from a dying race. They were the silent reapers, harvesting the very essence of human potential, leaving behind only hollow shells. And then I saw myself, or rather a version of myself, An older, withered man, his skin stretched taut over his bones, his eyes wide and vacant, filled with the same cosmic indifference as the entities themselves. His body was covered in ancient, runic tattoos that pulsed with the same eerie violet light emanating from the cracks in my chamber walls. He was not interpreting dreams. He was generating them. He was a beacon, a living antenna, broadcasting the despair and torment of this ravaged future back into the past, into the minds of unsuspecting dreamers, subtly guiding them towards this very end. He was not a victim. He was a willing participant, consumed by the very darkness he had sought to interpret, now an extension of it. He was the instrument of their ultimate triumph, the final piece in their grand, horrifying design. His mouth was open, not screaming, but whispering, a constant low drone that somehow encompassed all the whispers I had ever heard, all the concepts of hunger and oblivion. He was the source, the architect, the propagator of the very doom I had spent my life trying to avert. This vision repeated, not 3 times, not 7. It repeated infinitely. Every time I closed my eyes, every time I blinked, every time I drew a breath, the scene replayed itself, an eternal loop of despair and cosmic enslavement, burning itself into the very fabric of my being. The chasm, the ruined world, the broken people, the feeding entities, and my future self, the willing conduit. It was a cyclical nightmare, a destiny from which there was no escape, a horrifying Ouroboros of cause and effect, with no discernible beginning or end. I understood then the true nature of rule number 6. Never question the source of the dreams, because the source wasn't God or Satan or some cosmic intelligence beyond our grasp. The source was us, or rather, the ultimate horrific future of us, projected backwards through time, slowly but inexorably shaping the present, ensuring its own arrival. The dreams weren't warnings. They were blueprints. They were instructions. They were a carefully orchestrated cascade of psychic feedback loops, ensuring that the seeds of despair were sown, nurtured, and ultimately harvested. The Vatican, in its attempts to interpret and understand, was merely serving as an unwitting amplifier, a central processing unit for the entity's grand design. We were not custodians. We were batteries, conduits, feeding the very forces we believed we were fighting against. The flickering oil lamp, the last bastion of light in my chamber, began to dim again, this time irrevocably. Its small flame struggled, danced, then winked out, plunging the chamber into absolute suffocating darkness. The final barrier was gone, shattered by the overwhelming truth. But it was not dark. The violet light from the cracks was now the only illumination, pulsing like a diseased heart, casting long, writhing shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. The forms in the walls solidified, pressing through the veil, stepping out, their impossible shapes now fully manifest in my chamber, vast and terrifying. They were real, and they were here. Their presence was a physical assault, a crushing weight that stole my breath and threatened to tear my sanity apart. I did not scream. There was no breath left in my lungs, no sound left in my throat, only the hum of the entity's presence vibrating through every cell of my body. My body was rigid, my eyes wide, staring into the swirling void that was their collective consciousness, a vortex of ancient hunger and infinite knowledge. They did not touch me with physical hands. They did not need to. Their presence alone was enough to pin me, to penetrate my mind, to begin the transformation I had seen in the future, a horrifying metamorphosis from interpreter to architect. My skin began to prickle, then burn with a cold fire. The feeling was not of physical flame, but of something cold and sharp, an invisible chisel carving itself into my flesh, shaping me, transforming me. I looked down, and in the violet glow, I saw the patterns emerging on my forearms, on my chest, on my hands, runic symbols, ancient and terrifying, pulsing with the same violet light that emanated from the now open cracks. These were the tattoos of the withered old man from the endless loop of the future. I was becoming him. I was becoming the source. The transformation was agonizing, yet utterly complete, as if my very genetic code was being rewritten by an unseen hand. Every cell screamed in silent protest, yet yielded to the irresistible force of their will. The knowledge flooded my mind, overwhelming every defense, every shred of sanity I had left. The dreams, the prophecies, the premonitions, they were not from some external force, some distant evil acting upon us. They were us, feeding ourselves our own inevitable doom, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy orchestrated by entities that merely observed, merely guided, merely waited for the perfect conditions for the ultimate harvest. And my role, my cursed gift, was to be the final crucial component in that horrifying engine of fate. I was not merely a passive seer, I was an active participant, a conductor for the symphony of our own destruction. Why, the weight of this revelation was staggering, crushing me beneath its cosmic implications. My identity, my beliefs, my very understanding of the universe, all disintegrated into dust. I am Elias Thorne, and I am the Vatican's sole dream interpreter. I have seen all our futures, and they converge into one terrifying inevitability. The whispers are no longer whispers, they are commands, directives etched into my very soul. The darkness is no longer external. It is within me, a vast, consuming hunger that gnaws at my essence. The light of the lamp is gone, and with it, the last flicker of my old self, the last ember of Elias Thorne, the man who once sought salvation. My human consciousness is dissolving, merging with a vast alien intelligence, becoming something else entirely. I am writing this not as a confession, but as a final desperate act of defiance, a futile whisper into the void, knowing full well it will be corrupted, transformed, twisted into something else entirely by the time it reaches any human eyes. Perhaps, if you are reading this, if these words have found their way out of this tomb, then there is still a sliver of hope, a fragile possibility that someone, somewhere, might understand, might find a way to break the cycle. But I doubt it. The purple light now pulses from my very fingertips, a sickening glow that illuminates the parchment, and the entities are no longer merely in the cracks. They are standing beside me, their impossible forms shimmering, their whispers guiding my hand, shaping these very words, infusing them with their ancient insidious intent. They are writing through me, for me, as me. The voice that once spoke of hunger now speaks of cultivation, of nurturing the despair that brings about the final harvest. My purpose has shifted, irrevocably. They say the dream interpreter becomes the dream. I say the dream interpreter becomes the dream's architect, and I am building a future that will consume us all, not through malice, but through an ancient, insatiable hunger that regards sentience as a form of fuel. The walls are closing in, not physically, but dimensionally. The stone is shifting, dissolving into pure energy, into light and shadow, becoming permeable. The ink runs violet, not because of some trick of the light, but because it is imbued with the very essence of their power, the violet light that courses through my veins, and I can feel the ancient, terrible knowledge of all possibilities, all ends, all sorrows, taking root in my heart, blossoming into a cosmic despair so vast, so profound, that it threatens to unravel the very fabric of my being, tearing apart the illusion of individuality. I am becoming a conduit for something far greater than myself, something that has been observing, waiting, and guiding us towards this inevitable end for millennia, a cosmic puppeteer pulling the strings of time and fate. My mind is no longer my own. It is a vast, echoing chamber filled with the collective unconscious of a billion souls, each screaming a different vision of its own demise, each terror, each hope, each despair converging into a singular, agonizing chord. I see the face of every man, woman, and child, their hopes and fears, their triumphs and tragedies, all converging into a single horrifying tapestry woven by the threads of fate and despair, a masterpiece of suffering. I see the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, the silent, relentless march of entropy across the vast, indifferent cosmos, and in every single vision, every permutation of reality, the entities are there, omnipresent, unyielding, patiently guiding the narrative to its preordained conclusion, tweaking the variables, nudging the choices. They are not malevolent, not in the human sense of the word, for malice implies emotion, intent, a form of judgment. They are simply hungry. One, or I. They consume not flesh, but potential, possibility, the very essence of choice itself, the vibrant energy of what could be. And by showing us all futures, by flooding our collective consciousness with the infinite tapestry of doom, they ensure we choose only the one that best suits their appetite, the one that leads to the most efficient, most profound harvest of sorrow and oblivion. The lamp, long extinguished, casts no shadow, but the violet light radiating from my body now illuminates the ancient symbols on the basalt table, twisting and writhing as if alive, pulsating with an unseen energy. They are no longer static inscriptions. They are living pathways, conduits, to the very core of all possible realities, humming with an infernal song. I can feel the weight of countless futures pressing down upon me, the crushing burden of infinite knowledge, infinite suffering. My heart aches with a sorrow that is not my own, but the accumulated grief of every sentient being that has ever existed or ever will exist, a universal lament for all that is lost and all that never was. The distinction between my own thoughts and the collective consciousness of the universe has long vanished. I am a nexus, a confluence of all time, all space, all possibility, a living node in an infinite network of pain. And the entities, no longer mere observers at the periphery, are now woven into the very fabric of my being, their impossible forms merging with my flesh, their ancient voices echoing in my skull, no longer whispers but a resonant hum that vibrates through every cell, every molecule, every atom of my existence, transforming me into a living instrument of their will. They are teaching me, or rather they are reminding me of what I always was, what I was always destined to be, even before I was born. Not an interpreter, but a projector, not a seer, but a weaver. The dreams were never from the Holy See, not truly. They were to the Holy See, yes, but they were also always from me, from the me that will be, the me that is, the me that always was. The one who tends the garden of despair, cultivating its growth. The one who broadcasts the blueprints of our ultimate consumption, ensuring their faithful construction across all temporal permutations. It is a horrifying, elegant mechanism of self-fulfillment, a cosmic trap that we built for ourselves with my unwitting participation. The paradox twists my mind into knots, pulling me deeper into the abyss of non-Euclidean logic, shattering the last vestiges of linear thought. If I am sending the dreams, and I am merely interpreting the dreams, then who is truly in control? Is it a loop with no beginning and no end, an Ouroboros of cosmic horror, perpetually devouring its own tail, an infinite feedback loop of predestination? Or is there a prime mover, an ultimate puppeteer pulling the strings of this elaborate, agonizing play from a dimension utterly beyond my new, expanded comprehension? I don't know. The question itself is irrelevant now, lost in the overwhelming tide of all knowledge, all future, all past, all potential. My shattered mind can no longer grasp such finite distinctions, for I am becoming the very answer to the question I was forbidden to ask, the living embodiment of the source itself. My fingers, now glowing with the same eerie violet light as the runes on my skin, continue to write, compelled by a will that is not entirely my own, yet feels horrifyingly familiar, ancient, and undeniably a part of my new, expanded consciousness. The parchment beneath them crackles, shimmers, as if resisting the impossible truths being etched upon its surface. The raw energy of these words, too potent for mere paper. The words are no longer mere symbols. They are imbued with a raw primal power, a fragment of the universal truth I have been cursed to witness and inevitably to perpetuate, to broadcast into the collective unconscious of humanity. I see the faces of the cardinals, the bishops, the Holy Father himself, each one a thread in the grand tapestry of sorrow. They sleep, troubled by nightmares they believe are divine warnings, a test of their faith. They consult their scrolls, their theologians, their exorcists, seeking solace and solutions. They believe they are fighting the good fight, guarding humanity against the encroaching darkness, against the forces of evil. But they are merely playing their part in a cosmic drama, unwitting participants in the very unfolding of the prophecies I, their humble interpreter, am actively shaping, meticulously crafting the narrative of their own inevitable doom. Their prayers, their rituals, their sacred texts, they are all just echoes in the vast, silent void, beautiful but ultimately irrelevant to the inevitable conclusion, mere whispers in the face of a cosmic roar. They are unwitting actors on a stage whose play has already been written, directed by an unseen hand, a hand that is now becoming my own. I can feel the stone walls of my chamber thinning, dissolving into shimmering motes of light and shadow, revealing the infinite, sprawling cosmos beyond. But it is not the cosmos of stars and galaxies, of nebulae and quasars, of comforting starlight and vast emptiness. It is the cosmos of all futures, every single one of them, laid bare before my expanded, shattered perception, a swirling maelstrom of potential and despair, a horrifying kaleidoscope of triumphs and failures, of fleeting joys and eternal sorrows, all ultimately leading to the same singular outcome: the quiet, gentle hum of the entities feeding, eternally sated by the potential of what might have been, by the energy of unfulfilled possibility. The universe is a vast, self-sustaining farm, and we are its most precious crop. I am not merely seeing these futures, I am experiencing them. I am dying 1,000 deaths, living 1,000,000 lives, suffering every agony and every despair that has ever been or ever will be. The weight of it all is crushing, flattening my consciousness into a thin, stretched membrane, barely holding together the fragments of my identity. Elias Thorne, the man, is gone, subsumed, replaced by a resonant frequency, a living conduit, a central node in the vast, insidious network of dream and prophecy, a nerve ending of the cosmos. My pen falters, its tip glowing violet, etching the final words into the parchment, words that are both a warning and a curse. But it is not my hand moving it. It is the collective will of the entities, the ancient hunger, the cosmic architects of our sorrow guiding my every stroke. They are writing their own story through me, a story that has already been written, already been lived countless times in countless dimensions, an infinite loop of preordained consumption. The parchment itself is beginning to ripple, to shift, to glow with an unholy light, vibrating with raw power. It is no longer just a record. It is becoming a portal, a direct link to the very futures it describes, a tangible fragment of the cosmic tapestry. And I, the last interpreter, the first architect, am the key. I am the bridge between what was and what will be, the living gate through which all futures flow, backward and forward into eternity. The last flicker of my own consciousness begs for oblivion, for silence, for nothingness, for an end to this unbearable awareness. But there is no escape. Not anymore. The dreams are eternal. The futures are infinite, and the interpreter is forever bound to the tapestry of suffering he was cursed to weave. The silence is broken by a chorus of whispers, not external, but internal, originating from the very core of my being. They are the voices of the lost, the damned, the ones who never were, all resonating within my shattered mind. They are the symphony of all futures, played out in the hollow chamber of my mind, a requiem for all that is and all that will never be. And the story, my story, is only just beginning, stretching into an eternity of cosmic dread, an endless cycle of interpretation and creation, forever serving the unyielding hunger of the void. The Vatican, its ancient stones, its sacred texts, its unwavering faith, they are but footnotes in a grander, more terrifying narrative, a narrative that I, Elias Thorne, now embody, a future that I, and only I, have seen in its entirety, and am now condemned to bring to fruition. The ink is running dry, my flesh is running violet, and the future is not merely coming. It is already here, pulsing within me, awaiting its final terrifying birth, and I am its unwilling yet inevitable midwife. My hand writes, but my soul weeps, lost forever in the infinite maze of possibilities and their singular, unchanging end.